Hi there. I'm Donna. I'm a fair-skinned, dark-haired woman wearing glasses, and I am thanking you all for joining us for Alley Talks this month. Each month, we get together to learn about a variety of topics related to accessibility. Please follow us on Twitter. We are Alley Talks. That is A11yTalks, or visit us at our website, alleytalks.com, to keep apprised of upcoming sessions, speakers, and any other relevant information. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel to see past and both upcoming talks and this one when it's, well, now. Oh, and speaking of that YouTube plug, please keep in mind this session is being recorded. So if you have a sense of humor like mine, please let's just tuck that back in just for a little while. Alley Talks does seek to provide a friendly and safe environment. All participants should be able to engage in a productive dialogue. They should share and learn with each other in an atmosphere of mutual respect. So we require all participants to adhere to the code of conduct. You can find that on our site. If you have any questions throughout today's session, please enter them into the chat or just tag us on Twitter. We'll go ahead and we'll share these at the end of the talk. And please stay tuned at the end to learn about an upcoming Drupal Diversity and Inclusion Speaker Workshop just next month. We'll go ahead and throw the link to that in the chat too. But please, your voice is important, so hang on to the end to learn how to elevate it. So with all of that, today, very excited to be joined by Keely Catwells and Dan Edge of C Talent of Whaler. Keely's been involved with disability awareness and founded C Talent to meet the need of intentional representation. Dan has consulted with organizations around the globe, names like Lego, Sony, Netflix, focused on inclusion as well. They both have these very long and very impressive bios, but I have to say I went ahead and cut them short because I'm sick of hearing my voice. I'm sure you are too. I really would love to hear from them. So Keely, Dan, I keep saying this. I'm a huge, huge fan of all the work you're doing. And I really, really cannot wait to hear you talk about how representation shapes our reality. Are you guys ready to go?
Yes, let's do it. Thank you so much,
Right.
Donna. Awesome. So we are going to present. There we go. Hello, everyone. My name is Keely Catwells, and I am the founder of C Talent. I have long blonde, wavy hair, wearing gold square-rimmed glasses, and behind me is a very beautiful mountain-esque landscape. And Dan, do you want to do a quick visual description?
Yeah, no problem. Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Edge. I am a white 30-something male with curly blonde Viking-esque hair. That's my new description, and I'm sticking to it.
Love it.
No beautiful mountains behind me, just a really boring grey curtain, but it's great to see you all.
Awesome, thank you. So the goal of this session is to get an understanding of disability in film, TV, and media. As I mentioned, I'm the founder of C Talent, which is a company that has the goal of changing the way the world views and defines disability. C Talent was founded when I became disabled at 17 years old and lost a job in the entertainment industry due to ableism. So we quickly realized that disabled people usually don't have access to option A or option B. So we created our own option C, and that was C Talent. And we represent high-profile deaf and disabled talent. And we also consult for companies all around the world, helping them become inclusive and accessible beyond compliance. And Dan, do you want to give an intro?
An intro to consulting and compliance. Well, consulting in film and television is basically me and my team for C Talent, and we work with film, television, theatre, advertising, all those kind of companies. And we work from the beginning of the production process, looking at scripts, to pre-production, making sure everybody's access requirements are met, to in the actual production, making sure everything goes along swimmingly. And then we also work post-production to make sure that we have all things like captions and audio descriptions and all those kind of things are put in place to make the final stuff as accessible as possible, while also checking that everybody's representation is on point and moving forward.
And talking about representation, if we look back at the history of representation and the history of Hollywood, We go back to when the status of deaf and disabled people in entertainment industry was incredibly complex, and it stretches back all the way to the exploitive circus acts and quote-unquote freak show performances. And although the industry has come a long way from the cringe-worthy moments of early Hollywood, such as the deeply inequitable pay of little people during the 1939 filming of The Wizard of Oz, to today's deaf and disabled people still facing barriers to inclusion, such as the Academy favoring portrayals of disabled characters by non-disabled people. In addition, with the drive of inclusion of women in color in Hollywood, which is gaining traction, which is great, with initiatives like Time's Up and hashtag Oscars So White. Yet similar efforts focused on the inclusion of disabled people are still very much in their infancy. So the disabled community is gathering to advocate for more opportunities. So we often talk about these three prominent stereotypes that you will see in film and TV, which is your villains, victims, and inspirations. And I'm going to hand over to Dan to go through the examples that we have provided here on this slide.
Villains, victims, and inspirations. Three of the things that I am fed up of seeing on screen. I don't know about any of you when it comes to deaf and disabled people. So villains, those wondrous people that you see in Bond movies, hence why we've got two Bond villains there in that picture, where they hate the world because they're disabled and they've been wronged by the world because they're disabled. So the only answer is we must take it over and rule it like the evil overlords that we are. It's fun to play, but I'm kind of fed up of seeing it. Then there's victims, and they're the ones that go, oh, I'm deaf, I'm disabled, my life is so terrible. Oh, please, like, I want to die. And The Upside is a prime example of this, and also Me Before You, prime example. I've never quite understood movies where millionaires with girlfriends that love them, that have everything else in the world, don't get the support they need, but actually feel that killing themselves is a better option. I think we can change the narrative on that. I'm tired of seeing that narrative. And then there's the inspirations, and the inspirations are twofold. They're either inspirational to the other characters in the movie to enable them to do better because their life isn't as bad as the deaf or disabled person in the movie, or they're inspirations to the audience because they go, oh, wow, look at what you've overcome. And this one's really played about within Hollywood. The theory of everything, when at the end of the movie, when Stephen Hawking randomly walks out of his chair, is pure inspiration narrative. And I'm tired, and I'm sure a lot of other deaf and disabled people are tired, and we just want more rounded things. Can we move away from the stereotypes, please?
So how can we get away from these really frustrating and perpetuated stigmas and stereotypes? Well, one of the ways that we can get around of these stereotypes is thinking and changing the narrative around disability and thinking about the social model of disability and moving towards disability justice versus just disability inclusion. So the social model of disability is a way of viewing the world developed by disabled people. And the model says that people are disabled by barriers in society, whether that be communication, physical, attitudinal, and not by their impairment or difference. And then disability inclusion is a broad term to describe approaches to advance access and inclusion for disabled people. And a disability justice approach centers and prioritizes the approaches of those who have most historically been excluded, such as women, people of color, immigrants, people who identify as LGBTQIA+. So what are some of the things that we love to watch and why? Dan, do you want to jump in with what you like?
These are things that make me happy. So you've got Crypt Camp. Many of you might have already watched it on Netflix. Crypt Camp is a phenomenal documentary movie about the disability rights movement in the US. It's phenomenal. It's told by disabled people, and the voice is strong. Go watch it. Go learn. Then there's Coda. Coda is obviously a brilliant representation of the deaf community in many, many ways. And obviously it's won Oscars. Go on. One of the few Oscars to actually go to a genuinely deaf or disabled performer rather than somebody acting deaf or disabled, which is groundbreaking. And then one that you might not be aware of came out of the UK, I believe is currently on Netflix in the US. It's on iPlayer if you're in the UK for the BBC. It's called When Barbara Met Alan, and it's a docudrama about the disability rights movement here in the UK, mostly run with a disabled production crew, all deaf and disabled talent throughout. It's an amazing watch. Go watch it, go learn, both from an educational standpoint and just pretty damn good viewing standpoint. Go check them out.
And then we have social media and advertising. So C Talent was recently acquired by leading creator company Whaler, which marks one of the largest investments ever made into disabled talent in the creator industry, which is very exciting. But the reason that that was made possible is because so many disabled people, extremely talented disabled people, have gone to social media to create their content and show the world their stories and their narratives. Because disabled people have been so excluded from mainstream media and mainstream conversations, but social media has allowed us to celebrate our identities, educate others in authentic ways, and get around the gatekeepers. But unfortunately, barriers like inaccessibility, bullying, content suppression can make community building and telling those stories on social media that extra bit difficult. And especially challenging for marginalized communities and intersectional identities. But social media and influencers and content creators have really given us that opportunity to see our stories and for us to be represented. And a lot of brands, a lot of companies, as we know, have turned to social media to advertise their products on social media because the followers of these influencers and these content creators that are promoting their products, they are creating this ecosystem of trust and community, and brands are desperate to tap into that. So that is where advertising is going. That is where we're all headed. But unfortunately, with cable TV and traditional advertising, we still are seeing only 1% of disability representation seen on screen, less than 1%, which is truly unbelievable. And there's never, I don't think, not that I know of, has even been a study to tell us of the representation behind the camera. So there's a lot of work to do. And whilst advertising is really moving to social media, we still have to make sure that we are seen in traditional advertising as well. So here are some examples of advertising that we are not so keen about. Dan, do you want to jump in with the reasons why?
Yeah, and I mean, just to put that last stat into perspective, I'm sure many of you are aware, disabled people are 20% of the population and less than 1% of representation in advertising. So that's a big gap of people that need to be filled, 20% versus less than 1%. But these adverts are problematic. These advertising campaigns are problematic. This Superhumans one was from Channel 4 for the Paralympics in 2012 in London, and at the time everybody said how brilliant it was. The issue with the Superhuman Paralympics, and it was a beautiful thing to watch. It was the first time I'd majorly seen a huge group of deaf and disabled talent on my advertising screens, but it feeds into that inspiration narrative. It fed into that, look how brilliant these people are, look at what they've overcome. Yes, they're athletes, they do amazing things. And as the advertising campaigns have progressed, Channel 4 have moved more to that narrative. But the initial Superhumans campaign, although brilliant, came with its problems. Then there's Nike Fly shoes. These were a brilliant thing that a young man wrote to Nike, a young disabled guy with cerebral palsy, and he said, I want shoes that I can put on myself. Can we please design some? And Nike went, do you know what? Let's do it. And the thing is, they've designed these shoes, but the issue with designing these shoes and various models of these shoes now is that generally when they're released, then they're not made aware that these were designed for deaf and disabled people to use or people with impairments to use, and the sneakerheads all think they're really cool and just buy them up, which means the deaf and disabled community they're built for don't get a look in until at least the second, third or fourth run of manufacture of shoes. And they've also got a price tag issue, but that's a different conversation. But doesn't mean that non-disabled people shouldn't wear the shoes, but it's about, if you're building it for a community, let the community have access to them. And then there's this recent campaign from Pottery Barn. Oh, this one hurt my brain a little bit. If you look at this recent campaign from Pottery Barn, they say they've developed furniture that is ADA compliant, Americans with Disabilities Act compliant. Haven't seen a lot of the furniture, but the advertising itself made my brain hurt. And you could tell that they'd used non-disabled talent in these commercials. You could tell that they'd used the same chair in every shot for 2 different people sitting in it. I don't generally share my wheelchair with anybody. I don't see why many people would. And they were all talent of a certain age, as if young disabled people don't exist. So it was a very problematic campaign. And it's through my work as a consultant that we're trying to undo that, trying to widen the perception. And this is why perception makes change, because people like Pottery Barn will have conversations and will go, look, it's great that you've designed this furniture, but you need to open it out. It's not just older people with mobility issues. The rest of the world can use it too. It's not just about superhuman athletes, and it's not just about being a sneakerhead. It's about having a whole holistic approach and why that representation is important.
And here are some of our favorite disabled content creators to follow on social media. Amani Barbarin, also known as Crutches and Spice, who talks about advocacy and fashion and is just such an awesome human being to follow. And Paola Carozzo, who is a Latinx creator, also disabled, talks a lot about accessibility, fashion, beauty. And then Cole and Charisma, they call themselves an interabled couple, and they do a lot of content around just being a couple, one who's disabled, one who is not, and travel, and just, again, really awesome work that also is just advocacy as well. Because being a disabled person, there is a lot of advocacy involved, even if we don't want to be advocates all of the time, because we have to advocate for ourselves on a daily basis. And then disability in gaming, and this is Dan's probably favorite slide, I want to say. Dan, am I correct in that?
Yeah, I will get in a room with EA at one point. Everybody knows what The Sims is. And, why are we talking about gaming? Because gaming's part of media. Most people, the gaming industry is $1 billion industry. All your voiceover actors, all your motion capture actors, all those people are represented by SAG-AFTRA. They're represented by Equity here in the UK in terms of trade unions. They are performers. And The Sims is supposed to be the best life simulator in the world. You can be any gender, you can be any skin color, you can be any sexuality. But what you can't be in The Sims right now, is disabled. Disabled people do not exist in The Sims. This needs to change. And we need to see more deaf and disabled people in games, because do you know what? I played the latest Avengers game. It's not the best game in the world. Like, there's been better superhero games out there. I'm not going to lie. But it was the first game that I'd seen a wheelchair using character that I know has been genuinely made by a motion captured wheelchair using artist. It's groundbreaking. It shouldn't be, but it is. We should see it more and more, because, again, less than 1% in advertising, and I dread to think what we are in games. And when we are in games, a lot of the game characters still fit that villains, victims, and inspiration stereotypes we were talking about earlier. So games is just as important as TV, advertising, social media, and so on.
And then we have intersectionality, which is such an important and not talked about enough subject. And in these tweets here, we have the comments of why is the disability space in gaming so very white? And then another comment that says, just got muted and felt othered in Black Twitter space, speaking about being Black and disabled during COVID. It is really awful to feel uncomfortable in abled Black spaces and my voice to be minimized in educating white people. Disability and Blackness equals the forbidden intersection. So there are such a wide range of identities within this community, including other marginalized groups like Black, Latinx, LGBTQIA, Indigenous, and so many others. And it is not uncommon for some communities to feel like there's erasure when it comes to their stories and their experiences.
And the best way to remove that is to involve those people in media. This is a really big cycle, and you'll see me keep going around in a circle. And our work is to help change that, to help move the needle. So you see those intersectional groups that are disabled and LGBT, or are disabled and a person of color, or are disabled and female or male, or whatever gender you identify as. These are the things. The disabled community is vast. We all know this, but media will change perception of disabled people all around. So we need to get those intersectional faces, and it's our work that is hopefully starting to push that forward. And not only is it in all these traditional media spaces, it's in the brand new ones as well. It's in Web3. Now, if you guys are all techies, I don't need to talk to you about what Web3 is, but for those that aren't, it's the new shiny version of the web that is opening a big world of potential and new things, of VR and AR, and potentially a more accessible web for everybody, especially with the universe of smart things that we have going on. So Web3 is just as important, and there's already disabled people trying to make waves with art that you can see in the tweet down there. And then, the thing is with building Web3 like we are right now, is if we get disabled voices in the room, like us at C Talent, like yourselves, if you are techies here at this A11yTalk, we can build it and not have to reverse engineer it. And that's the dream, isn't it? To not tell people that it needs to be accessible, but open it up to everybody when it actually is. So Web3 is really exciting. Disability in entertainment, do you know what? We've been talking about it. We talked about Coda. The deaf and disabled community were like, oh my God, one of us has actually won an Oscar. It's amazing, superb. And that was a real high moment. But on the next side, we have the flip side, in the fact that UCLA did a study around underrepresented groups in TV, and disability wasn't even included in that study. Disability was off the radar completely. UCLA didn't even consider it a diverse group. So this just goes to show how much work we've got left to do. But that doesn't mean we're going to stop. Even when Keely, you were telling me a newer report came out today, and it said the figures have actually gone down in terms of representation. So we're not fighting a losing battle, we're just fighting a long one. And yeah, because we all know, as the deaf and disabled community, and hopefully our non-disabled allies, if you're watching this talk, welcome. I haven't forgotten you. But hopefully, you'll all go, C Talent doing this amazing work. We're doing our amazing work. And it's about making those figures go the right way. And of course, we don't want to be seen as inspirations. But here's some myths that we often get in our line of work. Access requirements are too expensive. No, they're not. Most software that you guys work with, some clever people have built access stuff in. Or disabled people have to play characters that are already disabled. No. Do you know what? You don't have to tell a story about the origin of my impairment to be an interesting story. I can be a brother, I can be a father, I can be a cousin, I can be a murderer, I can be a millionaire, I can be whatever my character needs to be, and my impairment can be secondary and not even talked about. Shocking, I know, but it's possible.
I definitely skipped a slide.
You did?
I did skip a slide.
You said that on
very important because we don't want to be seen as inspirations.
We don't. If you haven't watched it already, go watch Stella Young's talk on inspiration porn. She talks about it better than I do. Sadly, she's no longer with us, but it's an amazing, amazing speech. I'm not inspiring for getting out of bed in the morning. Generally not. But hopefully by changing the narrative in the media on why we do our work, why I sit there butting heads with production companies week in, week out, is to help change that narrative.
And seeing more stories where we achieve not despite being disabled or not despite our disabilities, but despite ableism. I think that's a really important storyline to see.
Yes.
Access coordinators and disability consultants. Dan, this is again your expertise.
This is me.
let you take it away.
Yeah, so access coordinators and disability consultants. This is the kind of stuff we've been working on at Sea Talent. In fact, apart from the one in the bottom left-hand corner, 3 of these were mine. So we have We the 15. Some of you may already be aware of the We the 15 campaign. We worked on the script. We argued with the United Nations. we helped source the talent. We helped make the sets accessible. And we came up with We the 15 with the International Paralympic Committee, the United Nations, and so many other amazing bodies besides, to try and change the perception of disabled people around the world, deaf and disabled people. Then probably my favourite job was this commercial here, where it says we all play a little fun. When we all play a little, fun stuff happens for the national lottery here in the UK, where they basically turned around to me and said, right, Dan, our lead is a wheelchair user. We want him to go down a giant skate ramp, fly off it, land on a beach, get chased by Vikings, crash through a museum, play xylophone on a dinosaur, and then fly off on a parachute wing. How are we going to do it? We did it. It's a great ad to watch. And then there's the Virgin Media Closer Together Faster. And that basically looks at internet connections and all shiny things that Virgin Media do here in the UK. But there's a gamer who's a wheelchair user. He's got his wheelchair in game, and he ends up falling in love with the woman that he plays the game with. Aww. And then finally, it's in the press now. I can finally talk about it. I worked on the latest version of Lady Chatterley's Lover to make sure, although time period sensitive, so some of the language and stuff is choice, that the representation of Mr. Chatterley and his perception of himself and his whole performance, actually done by a genuinely disabled performer, was legitimate, and things like chair transfers and all those kind of things out of ancient vehicles and all those things were as good as they could be. And that was a really interesting project to work on. So it is changing. These are prime examples, and this is what a disability and access consultant does. I talked about it earlier, but it's about working with productions as a whole to make sure everything's accessible for all the deaf and disabled talent involved, be that in front or behind the camera, but also making sure that references are on point, making sure nothing too offensive gets in, and making sure that representation is as good as it can be within the project.
And talking about things that benefit everyone, on the subject of universal design. So as everyone probably knows, universal design is the design of buildings, products, or environments to make them accessible to all people, regardless of age, disability, or other factors. And we love working on universal design with sets and those in production, and how universal design and creating a accessible space can change not just the way that people interact with the space, but the things that get created in that space, the storylines, the character arcs, and so many other things, including the culture. And as we know, every company now, it's so important that there is an inclusive and safe culture. There's no room for not having that anymore. And I know that has also been a big problem within Hollywood, but things and times are changing. So on the subject of universal design, we recently did a project with Sesame Street, consulting work with Sesame Street, which was, first of all, an incredible honor to be able to work with a company, a nonprofit, an organization who has just been a part personally of my life forever, and I'm sure so many other people's lives. But we spoke to them about how universal design does impact storylines, and we looked at their set and thought about how it could be redesigned if it was ever to be redesigned. And just worth noting that this is an older version of the set, and they have done some updates and upgrades, as this is an older look at the set. But Dan, I'm wondering your initial thoughts on things that we found from just looking at this set and talking about things that could have been changed and implemented.
Yeah, I mean, we talked with the Sesame Street crew, and we challenged them to tell us where the changes should be. And they instantly went, oh, that door number at the top of 120 is gold and really hard to see. It could be bigger and a brighter color for visually impaired people. We could redesign the stoop so it's more accessible for people with mobility issues. And then I said, great, but I'm a basketball player and you're making me play on cobbles. And they went, oh, we are. we could change that pavement so that any wheelchair user can play basketball. I'm like, yep. And I said, also, you haven't got any edged curbs for visually impaired people either. And they were just some of the examples that we went through. But we challenge the guys at Sesame Street, and we do that quite often when we're working with people, especially in a training standpoint, is we go, right, this is where you're working. Tell us where the problems are, and we'll tell you if we agree with you, or we'll help you find new ones so that they're not problems and we can help fix them and we can be more universal and inclusive and accessible.
We're so excited about the future of disability representation and accessibility. And I'm personally very excited as well about our clients that we represent at C-Talent on the talent management side. This is one of our clients, Drag Syndrome. Drag Syndrome are the world's first drag troupe made up of kings and queens with Down syndrome. They have been on national tours. They've been on European tours, touring the world with their shows and their performances, and doing major collaborations with Hulu, and they've got lots of exciting things in the works. So the future is bright, things are moving along, we're making a lot of progress, and I think it's not to be forgotten that we have come in at a time where advocates and activists have been doing this work for decades and decades and decades, and we are just really touching the surface, and we've got so much to thank for our advocates and activists who have really got us to this point of where we are today. So very excited about the future, and on that note, would love to open it up for a Q&A.
You guys are awesome. Thank you so much. This was not only so informative, but so much fun. And yes, we have a few questions, and I will try not to trip over my words. There's a different question on the screen than the one I was going to read. Okay. All right. What would the best, if you could make your own film or show about a storyline, what would that be about?
Oof.
I love this question.
It's a great question.
I'll jump in if that's all right, Dan, because I've recently been thinking about this. It's so funny. I mean, not to be selfish, but kind of to be selfish. I have never ever seen my experience, my medical experience, and my diagnosis and my condition ever portrayed on screen. Actually, I take that back. I've seen it once portrayed on screen in Grey's Anatomy, where the operation that the person had that I had was framed as the worst case scenario. And instead of having that operation, the person opted for assistive suicide. So if I, as a young person, when I was just about to have that operation, had seen that episode prior to having that operation, I think I would have been in a completely different place. I mean, I was already going through a lot of trauma and had faced a lot of misdiagnosis and had been through really the mill with the medical system. But I would love to see my diagnosis, my medical condition on screen, and to see how positive it is, but also to see the struggles and how one gets over those. So I would just love to see that represented on screen. So I think a film or TV show that doesn't necessarily have a storyline about that, but at least has it in it, would be fantastic.
Yeah, for me, I think, I have outside of being a consultant, I do work as an actor and a performer and also a professional wrestler. And I've always joked that I want to be the first physically disabled action hero. Because why not?
Why not is a good question. That's it. That Keely, to your story, that's shameful that's the only one we've seen. And in both cases, I hope you get what you wish for, because I certainly would. I'd be down for both of those. All right. So next, we've heard that somebody's asking if you have heard of the documentary Code of Freaks, and what were your thoughts on that?
I've heard of it, but in the spirit of honesty, I haven't had time to watch it. Keely keeps me very busy.
Oh, it's all your fault, Keely.
I have heard of it. I think I've seen bits and pieces of it, and I've heard great things about it. So this is such a great reminder to do a deep dive into that. Dan, you and I, we've got some homework to do.
We do. We've given you our watch list. We'll now follow yours.
Sounds good. All right, you mentioned intersectionality. You mentioned there the cost of the price prohibitive nature of the shoes. Can you touch on the social impact of the disability representation? I told you I was going to trip over the words. Forgive me, but I think the question's still valid.
Of course, I think it's the social impact of good quality representation. I think that's what you've got to look at. So, for example, I look at Barbara Met Allen as groundbreaking because it's the first time I've seen disabled people have sex on screen without it being pity-based, with it just being disabled people having sex and actually seeing it. Again, The Theory of Everything, which is a film that has a numerous amount of problems. If the non-disabled community believed that, every time I kissed a woman, she'd be pregnant. Because every time in that movie, when Eddie Redmayne as Stephen Hawking kissed a woman, she ended up having a baby after some weird Big Bang space explosion montage. So if you were to believe the theory of everything, I kiss a woman, she gets pregnant. Thankfully, not the case.
As an actor, I consider that a little bit problematic anyway.
So I think good quality representation not only empowers us as the deaf and disabled community, but it also will hopefully cut down on some of the ridiculous questions that non-disabled people feel it's okay to ask in public in general just because they've seen you in the lift that day. Like, can you have sex? Yes, I can. You've seen it on Barbara Met Allen. Like, you don't need to ask that question. And I think the more disabled people are normalized in society, the more disabled people are normalized in media representation, then we will move away from the narrative of inspiration and people will be seen more as individuals and will hopefully get the support they need, because at the moment it's one of those out of sight, out of mind things. So I think good quality representation on a regular basis, that also on things that aren't necessarily disability driven, will change the perception of disabled people around the world.
I really want to call out what you're saying there. That I believe, actually, Keely, I quote you frequently when disability is a normal part of the human experience. And if it's part of the human experience, so isn't making a sandwich, frankly. We don't necessarily need to highlight that unless you're really interested in mayonnaise or something. It's the same idea.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think too it's a domino effect, and I think as we saw with Coda, as soon as all of those awards, the Oscars were announced, we automatically started seeing more representation in The Simpsons, for instance. I think it was the first animated deaf character was the Simpsons. It came out in The Simpsons. So am I correct in that? I may be wrong. I
think you might be right, but I can't confirm or deny. So if somebody knows more than we do right now, because we deal with lots of these facts and they sometimes get a little bit blurred, but I think you may be right.
But still, the fact of domino effect, and I think we saw as well, personally with See Talent in our company, that all of a sudden, we got all of these inbound requests and people suddenly wanting to do things. Funding was suddenly available, and it's that one piece of representation had such a big knock-on effect. So it's yeah.
And we get similar effects when the Paralympics come around. Everybody's like, oh, but it's about turning that representation into a more regular thing. So the work is constant, but the work is more constant and consistent rather than, oh, the Paralympics are on, let's have a bunch of disabled people on TV. It's about having disabled people on TV 365 days a year.
Awesome. And that actually leads us beautifully into our next question. You mentioned the history and the trend of people in the industry to become advocates. You mentioned all these groundbreaking achievements that maybe shouldn't be groundbreaking, but they are. What do you see as the next steps in this movement?
I love that question. This is a great question. We always talk about normalizing disabled people being experts and subjects beyond just disability. And I really can't wait to see that happening more and more. And for us, we have a very heavy focus on employment, infrastructure, and education. So the employment of deaf and disabled people, that continues to be an issue with laws like 14C still being in place in America, which basically means that in many states in America, which means that disabled people can legally be paid sub-minimum wage. We're hoping to see that, I think, is changing in October this year, but that's taken 80 plus years to get changed. And then with education, I think there's a huge lack of accessible education, especially within the entertainment industry. Oftentimes, classes are not accessible for many disabled people. Training is not accessible, both financially and physically. And then we have infrastructure. An example is one of our clients went to an audition just the past weekend, and it was specifically looking for adaptive athletes. They opened the door and they were met with stairs. They weren't able to audition in the same building as everybody else. So although we have the ADA, which is fantastic and landmark legislation, we're still very behind with infrastructure and accessible infrastructure. So I hope that in this new phase of the movement, we go beyond compliance and we go beyond just the basic needs and wants of our human rights, but we actually go towards something that is pushing those quote unquote boundaries.
Yeah, and I always joke I'm in this job to put myself out of a job, because I don't want the generation after me to do what I've had to do. So the more I do it, I think the next steps for the movement is normalization. It's a big step, but it's normalization and I challenge companies all the time when they go, well, how do we ask about access requirements? And I go, the same way you do about dietary ones. You just ask everybody what their access requirements are, and you get used to putting them in place. And I always laugh when our industry says we can't do it. And I go, okay, so Dame Judi Dench, and I am by no means picking on Dame Judi Dench when I say this, is if Dame Judi Dench asked you for a green bowl of M&Ms, she would get a green bowl of M&Ms. So if a deaf or disabled performer asks you, can I have a wheelchair accessible hotel room? Guess what should happen? It's no different. In fact, it's probably easier. But
I was just thinking that.
It's about generating people to put it into their workflow and normalizing the question to everybody, because there are so many people with hidden impairments that won't necessarily go public because they feel they'll lose work. Normalizing the question, do you have any access requirements, and removing any fears around it from both sides of the equation, so that people can openly go, yes, I need this, and the other people can go, cool, we know how to supply that. I think that's, especially within media, that's the next steps within the movement. And I think we need to normalize it throughout the world, where asking somebody's access requirements is standard procedure.
It's a mutual meeting of needs.
Exactly.
So yeah, I love it. Well, on a somewhat lighter note, our next question asks, what has been your favorite project so far? I have to tell you, I'm over here geeking out over Sesame Street. I don't know why, but I am. But I want to know what your favorite ones have been.
I don't know. Lady Chatterley's Lover is massive, and it's going to be great on Netflix. If you love a bit of Downton, it's your kind of vibe, go for it. I think I enjoyed the National Lottery commercial that I spoke about, though, just because it was so vast and outside of the box, where they went, right, we want to make him fly, we want to make him play xylophone on a dinosaur, we want to do all of these things. I mean, I got to work with the team, the Wires team, and as a big superhero nerd, I geeked out for a second, that flew Christopher Reeve in the original Superman movie to help fly our wheelchair user to go down the skate park ramp. Like, this was the level I was working at. So for me, that was cool.
Favorite project. It's so hard. It's so hard. And then combine all of the things we've worked on with the talent too. I just want to wrap it up and say, See Talent is my favorite project. It's going to wrap it all up in a bow. See Talent is a favorite project. I don't think I can do an individual one. It's amazing to see, and lots of things that people don't see from the outside of things that, our managers do in the trenches. And being a talent manager at C Talent is very different to being a talent manager at any other company. At C Talent, you are an advocate and an activist and a talent manager all at the same time. And you are having very difficult conversations with many people and educating people on a daily basis. And I have so much respect for our talent managers and what they do. And I mean, as an example, one of our talent managers had to drive to LAX, the airport, at 3 a.m. in the morning to go and pick up a client because they were deaf and they were having trouble getting through security. And it was a whole thing, but our talent manager was there to help navigate ableism within kind of that basic interaction. So they're just amazing. I have so much respect for what they do.
That's incredible. Yeah, so much impact. That's awesome. Just so you know, you talked about people doing things behind the scene. One of our amazing peeps behind the scenes looked it up. The Simpsons makes history with the first deaf voice actor and use of American Sign Language on April 10th, 2022.
Yeah.
So you were correct.
Amazing.
Amazing.
You are.
I love
they
that.
share the link too.
Yeah, no. We've got a whole team supporting us, so thank you to the A11yTalks team for looking that up.
Thank you.
Oh, here's a good one. Have you seen a TV show make a correction or change something based on the feedback when they got something wrong? I was going to try to think of a nicer way of saying it, but they just got it wrong.
It's a great question. That is a great question.
I've seen it behind the scenes, so not necessarily things you'd see on screen, but I have seen it behind the scenes on projects that I've worked on where I've called companies out and they've gone, oh, yeah, we should change that. I'll give you an example. I won't say what job it was on because, but they said, we're working with a wheelchair using actor. I said, great. Have you got any accessible toilets on set? They said, well, no, there's one in the supermarket around the corner.
What?
And I said, hang on a minute. On what planet would you ask any performer to go to the loo in the supermarket around the corner? Please change this. And they went, you're right. Lo and behold, there was accessible toilets on set. So I can tell you of lots of behind the scenes examples like this. Obviously, we've seen some great examples recently of non-disabled allies being pressured into changes in the music industry in terms of Lizzo and Beyonce, and their use of derogatory language. So that's a great example of people making changes when they've been called out. And I think that's a great example of how the movement is moving forward. That the disabled community via Twitter, via social media can go, you've got this wrong. And people are starting to listen.
I do want to say with that, I want to see more. I want to see the disabled community also holding white music artists to higher standards as well. I think there's been, I think there's just kind of been this bias or racism, or I don't know what it is, but we automatically have gone and held Black artists at higher standards. And I don't think that's right, obviously. And I want to see, I definitely want to, and I've learned this as we've had these conversations with our team and the community in the past couple of weeks, of the Black disabled community need to be leading this conversation. And there's so much work that we need to do around that as well. So just thought I would throw that in there.
Yeah. Even the disabled people's movement has work to do. It has been predominantly white, and that's why the disability justice model is now coming front and center on top of the social model, or in partnership with, depending on how you look at it. And so I think it's vitally important that we recognize that, as well as having all the social model type barriers of communication, physical access, and so on, that you've also got other barriers that if you come from a diverse group that you have to battle as well as those. And I think, that's a prime example of making sure those voices are heard just as equally. And that includes entertainment, because you want to see life echoed on screen or on stages. And, it's our job as, not as gatekeepers, because we're not, there's much bigger gatekeepers than us, but as guys that are trying to break down those doors and break down those gates to go, oh, while we're here, think about this too.
That's fantastic. Thank you for the work you're doing every day. Do you have any closing thoughts that you would like to share with everyone, as they step away with this? Because I feel like I know I have a lot of homework. I know I can't come away from one of these discussions without a reading list or a watch list or something. But in addition to that, are there closing thoughts or perspectives you'd encourage people to keep in mind as they come away from this programming?
I think I would say just be aware of what you're supporting. I think it's easy to kind of see something and then straight away be like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, but it's not always what it seems on the surface. So do research over the representation, and on the other side of that, support disabled talent, support disabled creators, support disabled writers, and support people in the industry, because as we know, Hollywood is hard enough as it is, and then throw in ableism and all of these other issues that it brings. It's a tough industry. So just support disabled creatives in general. And also, I always say, I believe to change the world, we have to learn to tell and listen to a new set of stories about the world that we want to create in accessible spaces and with authentic voices. So I will leave with that.
See, how am I going to follow that? No, but in all
You can go back
seriousness,
to your Viking hair.
well, yeah, I'll just swoosh it. There you go.
There you go.
No, but in all seriousness, I just want to take a second to acknowledge everybody in the comments, because they've been dropping some great examples of deaf and disabled representation in the comments. Megan, if it's a bit of a fan moment for you, I know Miss Scott from Grantchester. She's lovely. She's a good friend of mine. But also thank you for dropping all those great examples, and the behind the scenes crew linking our Simpsons reference so people can investigate that. Much appreciated. But yeah, like Keely says, look, you'll get into a habit now, having been in this talk, because I do it all the time. You'll see a deaf or disabled person on screen, and you'll be on Google going, are they deaf or disabled? And I do it all the time. Every time unless I know who they are, I do it all the time, because I like to see the representation go up. And if they don't, then you can start, social media is powerful. You don't have to be aggressive about it, but you can go, hey, studio, noticed you had a non-disabled performer playing this disabled character. Can I ask why? And the more of those questions they get, don't think it doesn't register, because it does. There are people watching those social media channels, and they're going, oh, we've had 12 questions in the last 20 minutes asking us why this isn't a non-disabled actor. This needs to be sorted out. Who can we talk to? And then generally Keely or I get a phone call. But yeah, so, enjoy genuine disabled representation, support the artists, and also, use social media. If there's something you don't like, don't be aggressive about it, but just challenge bad representation.
Fantastic. Just wow. Thank you both so much for taking the time. I acknowledge how incredibly busy you both are. It's late where you are, Dan. Keely, you're all over the place doing all these amazing things. Follow them both on LinkedIn. They're amazing. All the work you're doing every day is awesome. So thank you for making a difference across the board.
Thank you.
So
With
that, I wanted to just give our own audience here a little bit more information about an upcoming speaker workshop. Most of us aren't going to be here anytime soon to Keely and Dan's to speaking, but you can definitely have a voice. You definitely are important, and it's important for us to hear your voice too. So please, if you're interested in it at all, there's a speakers workshop next month. SF Doug is doing it with Marjorie Freeman and Amy June Highline. both community managers at Red Hat, and they will be hosting it in conjunction with the Drupal DEI community. This workshop is a great fit if you've ever felt uncomfortable about speaking at events or just wanted to present but found yourself wondering, what on earth would I talk about? It is going to be a virtual event, August 11th at 5:30 p.m. I don't know the time zone. I'm going to guess it's SF Doug, so I'm going to guess specific, but check it out. Well, our Twitter, I'll have somebody who knows this better than I do fix this because my notes were poor and that's my fault. I'm sorry. So there is a DDI camp as well. That's a Drupal Diversity and Inclusion Group camp, virtually September 16th and 17th. Thank you again, Keely and Dan. Thank you so much for everyone who's joined us for today's A11yTalks. Some of the comments you may not have seen are, how do we get everybody in the world to watch this? They need to see this talk. And I can't agree more. So please, once we post it, feel free to share it. We need to get this beautiful information out. So your support is huge, people. Thank you so much for joining us and have a beautiful day.